Before we start today's episode, I wanted to say thank you to some of our patrons. Pixel Project Radio is supported exclusively by listeners like you, and I want to say thank you to the following listeners and patrons. Patrons such as Dustin Miller, Dave Jackson, Chris Copleen, Ryan Yingling, Masked Llama, aka Poppy the Keaton, Eric Guess, Charlie Young, and Colby Moyer. Thank you to these incredible and wonderful people who have chosen to support our show. If you like what we do and you would like to pitch us a couple of bucks a month to keep making content and making bonus content, you can do so by heading to patreon.com/pixelprojectradio. We have a variety of tiers to choose from, and each one comes with its own set of benefits and perks. You can get perks such as our schedule 2 months in advance, so you can play along with the show if you'd like. Bonus episodes, Pixel Patron Radio episodes. The ability to vote in polls to decide what games we're going to play. Access to our scripts and notes, and more. In fact, this episode today, Pokemon Snap, was chosen by our patrons. How cool is that? They made this possible. If you wanted to be like these wonderful people, again, please check out patreon.com/pixelprojectradio. Thanks, everybody. I hope you enjoy the episode. Now, where'd that Pikachu get off to? I'm gonna get ya. Welcome back to Pixel Project Radio. My name is Rick Firestone, your host. No surprise there. It's me, again, as always. How are you? Did you get that thing checked out? Did you get that thing that I sent you? Here's a throwback. Harvey Birdman, attorney at law. If you're new to the show, this is a video game podcast where we do all sorts of discussions on our favorite games and some of yours as well. Just real quick before we get into the episode, we'll talk more about this later on towards the end, but if you like what we do, or if you like what we've done, you can find us on socials on Instagram and Twitter and Discord. But again, we'll talk about that more a little bit later. Today, we are talking about the snap that's taking the youth by storm, which is what I would have said if we recorded this 2.5 decades earlier. Time does not stop for any of us. Today, we're talking about Pokemon Snap, specifically the Nintendo 64 original. And my co-pilot today, riding in the 01, helping me throw all the pester balls, Pokemon food, and toot some Pokeflutes while we're at it, is the host of the Still Loading podcast, Josh Covel. Josh, thanks for joining me today, man. It's good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me on. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time, and I'm excited to talk about something not Thanos' snap, though I'm not known for, I guess, for talking Marvel, but that's the only other snap I could think of that's semi-ubiquitous. So, yeah, I'm happy to talk Pokemon Snap today.
It's funny, sometimes on the day of recording, I will, seek out some other podcasts talking about the games that I'm doing, just to kind of get in the zone and have some internal dialogues like, oh yeah, I agree with this and here's why, I don't agree with that, here's why. And when I search this on my podcast app of choice, I got a lot of Marvel Snap episodes and not a lot of Pokemon Snap. So it's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to this. This is a game that I never owned as a child because I did not have an N64, but we'll get into our histories in a moment. If you're new to the show, one thing that we like to do at the beginning is give just a really brief 1 or 2, maybe 3 sentence TLDR of how we felt about the game. And I'd like to do that now. Josh, would you like to go first?
Of course, thank you. I was trying to think over this when you're telling me to come up with like a 2-sentence, or actually mine's even less than that. It's 1 sentence, or maybe, I don't know. English has never been my strong suit. Who would have guessed that it's my native language? But in any case, Pokemon Snap, the way I kind of always figured it is, it's nostalgia in theory, but underwhelming in execution, if that makes sense. Like, it's warm nostalgia. When you think about it, you get nothing but warm fuzzies for those who remember it, but in execution, it is very underwhelming. And I still love this game, but yeah, so I'm rambling already. Nostalgia in theory, underwhelming in execution. That would be my sentence to describe Pokemon Snap.
Sure. I think we're feeling some of the same things for sure. Listeners that have been around for a while know that I have a tendency to be a bit loquacious, so let me read what I got here. A terrific marriage of consumerism, contemporary crazes, and the fifth generation of gaming consoles, Pokemon Snap gave kids a new look into the Pokemon universe. The once stagnant setting on the Game Boy was now fully rendered in 3D and let players examine the wildlife, quote unquote, with minimal gameplay or mechanical distractions. That's kind of my take on it. And I kind of alluded to the fact that I never had this as a kid, so I want to get into our histories with this game and maybe with Pokemon as a whole. It's going to be kind of difficult to not talk about the sheer cultural force that has been the Pokemon franchise. So, did you have this game when it was contemporary, when it was new, Josh?
I did, and in fact, this game is synonymous with my start of getting the N64. So I got my N64 for Christmas when I think I was 10. Which actually would line up with when this game came out. So I was 10 years old. And what I remember was I got it for Christmas and I was actually bummed because at the time I just wanted a Sega Genesis because that's what my neighbors had and I loved their Sega Genesis. It's all I wanted was a Sega. So when my parents got me my N64, I was like, what are you doing? This isn't a Sega Genesis. Are you crazy? This is not. And obviously they're very different consoles that both have different strengths and weaknesses. But as a kid, I was like, this isn't Sega. This is stupid. And so they got me Donkey Kong 64. It was my console came with Donkey Kong 64, and I wasn't really a Donkey Kong fan back then, so I was even more underwhelmed. I didn't understand what the game was. So I remember that it was either the day after Christmas or 2 days after Christmas, we went to our local Blockbuster, and I rented this game from Blockbuster, and I played a ton of it. And now that I'm thinking about it, I didn't actually own this game as a kid, but I did play it a ton because I rented it from Blockbuster a good amount. I ended up buying it years later once I started becoming a collector, but I played a lot of Pokemon Snap as a kid, and I have a lot of fond memories with it. And I'll tie it back in a little bit later as to why I said it's nostalgia in theory, but underwhelming in execution, because when we get into the game, I'll explain that more thoroughly. But my personal history is that I knew what Pokemon was because my friends had the games. I didn't have a Game Boy as a kid, so I couldn't play it, but I had Pokemon cards. And I talked about this on my recent Pokemon Gen 1 episode where the way I got into Pokemon, everyone else was obsessed with it. I would watch the cartoon, but I didn't have the games. But everyone was collecting Pokemon cards back then. In fact, it was not surprising, like at that time, like they would ban Pokemon cards in school because kids were just stealing them from each other. And the way I actually got my first set of Pokemon cards was that I traded in the cardboard cutouts of Lunchables. If you remember Lunchables, they had like their own version of Pokemon cards.
Oh yeah.
And I traded like 8 of them for one real Pokemon card, and I think it was a what was it? I think it was a Machop, and I was like in love with this card, even though it's just a basic Machop, but it was my first Pokemon card. I'm like, I don't have this. This is amazing. And so that's how I got into Pokemon. And then, of course, when Snap came out, it was just anything Pokemon. I didn't give a shit what it was. I wanted to play Pokemon. So played Pokemon Snap literally the second or third day of me having an N64, and I loved it. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, the pull that those cards had on the general age group that we were in was just so extreme and so immense. And we'll get into just the marketing that this game had because it's a big part of why it did so well. That's interesting. I can imagine you getting that N64 and just being like, man, now how am I going to do the things Nintendo don't? I don't have a Sega.
What's even funnier is what I really wanted was Tiny Toon Adventures Buster's Hidden Treasure for the Sega Genesis. I fucking loved that game as a kid, and I did an episode on it on my own show about a year ago or so. But yeah, it's just really that was why I wanted the Genesis. So when I got the N64 and Donkey Kong 64, which now I love, despite its flaws, it wasn't what I wanted at the time. So when we went to Blockbuster to find a different game, Pokemon Snap was the first one I remember grabbing, and I loved it. I loved playing Pokemon Snap. It was the closest thing I had to being able to play Pokemon at the time.
Yeah, and I don't think that you'd be alone in that. I did not have an N64 as a kid. I still do not own an N64. I might get added to the collection someday, but not yet. But my best friend as a kid did. I was the PlayStation 1 kid. He was the N64 kid. So we played Pokemon Snap a lot at his place, as well as Pokemon Stadium. And this is something we'll get into as we talk more about the game, but Pokemon Snap approached the immersion aspect of the game in a much different and arguably better way, I think, than Stadium did. But we've been talking about our experiences with it as kids. So let's go back in the Wayback Machine real quick, borrowing it from Stuff You Should Know. Thanks, guys. And we're going to talk a little bit about what this was like when it was contemporary. So this was released in Japan first, of course, in March of 1999. The US got it shortly thereafter in July of the same year. August and the EU got it the following year in, I want to say September of 2000, I think. So this is prime Pokemon time. It was nuts. And if you're a younger listener or maybe an older listener that was beyond the age demo for Pokemon, it's really difficult for me and probably for you too, Josh, to understate. Is that right? Yeah, it's hard for me to overstate, actually, is how ubiquitous and strong and commanding Pokemon was over everybody.
Oh.
This was not like, it wasn't like the cool kids weren't too cool for Pokemon. The cool kids played Pokemon. The quote unquote nerdy kids played Pokemon. Everybody played Pokemon. It was nuts. And they really leaned into that with this. This was developed by HAL Laboratory, so Smash Brothers, you know them. Published by Nintendo, of course. This was originally going to be just a sort of on-rails photography game.
Mm-hmm. For the 64 disc drive, if I remember correctly.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The 64 Double D, the disc drive that that did not get released in the States, did it?
No, never came out in the States. And obviously this game didn't come out for the disc drive, obviously, because it came out on the main console. So yeah, no, 64 disc drive never came out in the States, unfortunately, which I guess it's a mixed bag. But yeah, it never came out.
Right. It did. It got delayed so much, the 64 disc drive did, that they just decided to put this onto the cartridge system itself for the 64. Satoru Iwata and Miyamoto, that's right, that Miyamoto, they were producers on this game. And it was actually Iwata that suggested leaning into the Pokemon branding. The development team was, from what I understand, originally not crazy about that. But I guess as they developed it, they were like, oh, yeah, this branding makes sense. And also, we love Pokemon now. So that's pretty cool. And I think that branding was a big part of why this game sold so well. This game was marketed to hell and back. It was marketed like crazy. You mentioned Blockbuster. And
I know where you're going with this.
Yeah. So with Blockbuster, you could actually take your cart, your game, into the store, and they were able to print out the actual photos that you took of your Pokemans. And then you could take it to school and be like, yeah, take that, idiot. I'm going to be in National Geographic one day.
My local Blockbuster had this.
Really?
Yes, it had this. I never got to use it, though, because it was always one of those things where my parents were like, we're not going to spend money on that, which is valid. I don't blame them. And it's funny, we talked a second ago about the disk drive. The reason this was originally intended for the disk drive is that they could store higher resolution photos on the discs than you could on the cartridge. And obviously they made that concession for when they released on the cartridge, but that was the initial intent. So I can only imagine what these pictures would have looked like if it could have been released on the disc drive and the disc drive came out in North America. But my local Blockbuster did have this, and years later, after I bought my copy at a game store, I'm kicking myself for this now. I saw another copy of Pokemon Snap, and at this game store. This was like a couple years after I bought my copy. And I was just like, oh, that's cool. Pokemon Snap. I already own it, whatever. But I flipped it around and someone had taken all those printout stickers and plastered the back of their cartridge with this Pokemon Snap cartridge with them. And I should have bought it because it was gone afterwards, but I love shit like that. Like, that cartridge tells so much of a story of, like, you can see all these different photos that this kid took and liked enough that they put it on their cartridge so that way they could kind of have that keepsake every time they play the game. I just thought that was such a cool thing, and I'm kicking myself now for not buying it, because even though it wasn't my memories, I think that's one of the cool things about this game, and one of the reasons it still resonates with me, regardless of when we get into the gameplay and I talk about the flaws with it. I still overall enjoy this game, and a lot of it is due to stuff like that, where it's this interesting connection to a point in time that we just don't have anymore. I'm sure, I don't know if we're going to talk about the sequel. I don't actually own the sequel, but a couple years ago, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the dude who created Pokemon. Is it Tajiri who created Pokemon? Satoshi Tajiri? I'm going to double check on that. But years ago, they were, I'm talking like 2012, I want to say, so about a decade ago. Satoshi Tajiri, I was right. They were, there was all this talk about wanting a new Pokemon Snap, and Tajiri specifically said, I don't really foresee that being a good idea, because the reason Pokemon Snap worked so well in 99 when it came out, no one really had easy access to cameras. Like, yeah, you could get disposable cameras and stuff like that, but most people, like kids, don't have access to a disposable camera. And even if you did, you would have to take the pictures and then take them somewhere to get them developed. Now everyone has cameras on their phone. So that immediacy, like that uniqueness of it, of being able to take pictures of Pokemon, it really just doesn't apply anymore. And I almost wonder if that's why the newer one isn't quite as beloved, just because we can all take pictures on our phone now. So like the idea of just taking pictures isn't as novel as it was to a kid back in 99, when you couldn't really a kid couldn't take pictures. They didn't have the ability to do that easily. Second, we have Pokemon Go, which you can essentially do the same thing as in Pokemon Snap as you want. You can essentially do the same thing in Pokemon Go as you do in the new Pokemon Snap. So this game really feels like it was meant for 1999, meant for this time and this place. And I think that's really interesting about it.
Yeah, it was very prescient in that way. Being the age that I am, when this came out in 99, I was 7. Turning 7. I was gonna turn 7.
All right, you're only a little younger than me.
Yeah, not by much. Fast forwarding a few years to, like, I don't know, 2006 through 2009. That was when digital cameras were like really popular among middle schoolers and high schoolers.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was cool to have one, and people like to just take pictures to take them and put them on their computers. Those family Dells and etc. And then of course. Yeah. And then of course, smartphones came around. So I think you're hitting the nail exactly on its head. This was prescient insofar as, it gave kids a way to take pictures where before they really didn't have that. I mean, adults had disposable cameras. Maybe some kids had disposable cameras, but it didn't have that immediacy like you mentioned.
Yes.
And that's a big part of it.
Sorry, I was just going to say, this is a very quick side tangent, but I do find it amusing because you brought up digital cameras. I think it's such a unique, interesting time period, like, early aughts to like 2010, like 2003 to 2010, because there's a whole bunch of technologies that came out that were super popular that have since become extinct because of smartphones. GPS, MP3 players, and digital cameras are all useless now because they're all built together into our smartphones. I just always find that such a interesting time period of this, like a less than 10-year period where this technology became outrageously popular in like 3 different facets and then disappeared. Sorry, we can go back to Pokemon. I always find that area of tech interesting, in a goofy way.
Oh, dude, same here. I'm somebody that has, I would say, more than an average interest in tech, more than the average person. I think it would be fun to put together a panel discussion on this. And let me just say, I'll take any opportunity that's given to me to pour one out for the best MP3 player that ever was.
Is it the
Zune? Yeah, you knew.
I fucking knew it right away. Everyone goes for the iPod, but no. I didn't have an iPod or a Zune. It was a Panasonic. I don't even know what the name of the system was or the player was, but I kid you not, it was a square brick, or sorry, it was like a rectangle, and it was like maybe 3 inches, like 2.5 inches wide by like an inch deep and high. So it's like a perfect square from one angle, and then it's like 3 inches wide. And it was this tiny thing that only held, how much space did it have? I want to say like, it couldn't have been too much. Like I could maybe hold, I think it held like under 200 megabytes or something like that. It was like under, so I could hold like a couple albums, and that was about it. And that was enough for me, which honestly was kind of nice, because then I wasn't burdened by an abundance of choice. I was like, well, I only have 5 albums to choose from. I'm gotta pick one of these. Which one's my favorite today? But that's all I had that thing for years, and then I accidentally bricked it when I tried to use it as a storage, like a file storage device. I'm like, I didn't have a USB thumbstick at the time. I'm like, well, this thing stores music, so I understand it's not going to be able to do anything with files, but maybe I can use it as a USB drive. Nope, I bricked it real fast, and there goes my one and only MP3 player.
That's tragic. Now, before we get too far into it, here's something totally new that we're starting. In the Discord, I started a channel called Community Forum. And my idea for this channel is every month I will post the games that we're planning to cover and give some deadlines for folks to write in some contributions to read on the show. It's whether it's just a couple of sentences saying what they thought about it, or a full paragraph with heartfelt emotion in it. Anything you want. We'll read it. Well, maybe. Mostly anything. But we did get a couple for this episode for Pokemon Snap, so I wanted to read them. First up, we have Dave Jackson from Tales from the Backlog. He says, Pokemon Snap was equal parts fun at seeing your favorite Pokemon from the Game Boy games come to life, and fun throwing apples at their heads and seeing how they reacted. I turned out fine, I promise. Yeah. PETA hates this game. Don't let PETA find out about this. We also heard from Poppy the Keaton. And Keaton says, I don't know why I loved the original Pokemon Snap so much, but I did. I rented it multiple times until I bought it at a yard sale. Then played it some more, and my best friend got addicted as well, so when the remake came out, I made sure to pre-order it, and when it released, we got pizza and soda that night and spent all night passing the controller back and forth until we couldn't stay up anymore. Just like old times, except until we couldn't stay up anymore was midnight and not 4 a.m. Sheesh. Yeah, I don't disagree at all. It's tough to stay up that late anymore. Time, like I said in the beginning of the episode, time waits for none of us. And I can imagine, folks with kids like you, Josh, will have are much more appreciative of time. But thanks Keaton, and thanks Dave for writing in. As always, folks, if you want to join the Discord. You can find links to that in the description and on our socials. Talk about that more at the end. But you too can write in. Thanks, guys. So normally we would talk about what this game is. We would introduce the game more properly a little bit sooner. Pokemon Snap, I'm sure most folks know what this is, but just in case you don't, you play, and I swear to God this is true, as Todd Snap. And essentially what happens is Professor Oak asks you to take pictures on Pokemon Island. And that's it. There's no fuss. There's nothing else. Also, that is far and away my favorite joke to use with talking about other things like, the chainsaw that was invented by John Chainsaw. And they did it. Pokemon Snap, you play as Todd Snap. That's so funny to me, and I don't think it's supposed to be. But
from my understanding, the character was based off of a photographer named Todd in the cartoon, in the anime. And then, but they called him Todd at first. And then once Pokemon Snap came out, they ended up calling him Snap. So it was like this bizarre conflation of, it was very confused. And so by the end of later on in the show, they rectified it and they changed his name to Todd Snap. So that way all continuities made sense. So I think Todd Snap was retrofitted to make it work, but I don't think his original name was Todd Snap, because I don't even think, do they ever even say your name? Because you choose your name when you play Pokemon Snap. Like, it's not like, it doesn't even give you as a default as Todd, like, you know, in JRPGs where it'll give you the default name, but you can change it to whatever you want. No, it's completely blank. So it's not like it was meant to be Todd. It was just retrofitted to be that after the Pokemon anime. So I just find that I love it when something isn't meant to be and they're like, we got to figure out how to make this work now. Let's put a square peg into a round hole and shave off those edges, baby. We're going to make this work.
I don't know that I'd go that far to use the square peg round hole, but
no, it's not quite that. Maybe it's more of like an octagon in a round hole where it kind of fits, but it's not a perfect fit.
Sure. And I'm glad that you brought up the anime, because my memory of this was that Todd was introduced in the anime and then they made Pokemon Snap. I could not find any definitive evidence as to say whether Todd was in the anime and then they put him in the game, or he was in the game so they put him in the anime right before it came out.
I don't know.
It seems pretty likely that it would be the latter to me. But you were right before. He's not canonically named Todd in the game, as far as I know. He was Todd in the English dub, Toru in the Japanese dub. Is that Japanese? The original Japanese. You know what I mean.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was another marketing thing to have this character appear in the show, because and this is something that I think of every time I see contemporary Pokemon episodes. Todd never came back. He was there for the end of like one season, and then he was just gone. And you have other not third party, but other minor characters like Tracy always coming back, and whoever. I don't know much about Pokemon, but Todd, he just kind of never came back.
Real quick, I have an answer for you. Which came first, the anime or the game? His first appearance in the anime was in an episode called Pokemon Paparazzi. It aired in Japan on July 23rd, 1998. So it aired almost a full year, a little less than a year, or 9 months prior to the release of Pokemon Snap, which, to be fair, that would be in the development window for the game. So I wouldn't be surprised if they came up with it in tandem. So they released it on the show. So that way, when the game came out, kids could be like, oh my God, I'm that Pokemon Paparazzi dude.
Right. Exactly so. The development window and the release of that episode, they fit together pretty nicely. So it's likely that it was part of the marketing deal. Exactly. Just talking about the critical reception at the time, it was a bit of a mixed bag. Just looking at some different numbers, IGN, classic IGN, guess what they gave it?
A 70.
That's right, a 7 out of 10, 7.8 out of 10 for
7.8. Okay.
Nintendo Magazine 85%, EG Monthly 83, Game Revolution C+. So it was, you got to take into account that reviewers generally don't give anything below a 7 out of 10 unless it's quote unquote bad.
Broken.
Yeah, which is dumb, IMO. But so this game was generally positively reviewed, I think is safe to say. Mm-hmm. Generally so. Some folks called the gameplay loop addictive, and I think that is a good way to describe it, because it is slow-paced. There's not a lot of anxious energy in any given run. You can repeat runs as much as you want, and runs are really short. Like, I think the longest levels will take, maybe 5 minutes?
Something like that. No, you're 100% right. The levels are very slow paced, which is perfect for it would be dumb if you had a photography game that you just sped through all the levels. It's like everything is just motion blurred to hell and back. Like, I'm just imagining how much of a shitty design that would have to be just to the speed. Like, that would just be awful. That would completely defeat the purpose of a photography game. Yeah, sorry, I lost my train of thought. What were we just saying?
Hey, you're already fitting right into the show.
Oh my god. I made a point and I'm like, I don't know where I'm going with this point anymore, so I'm just going to trail off here.
No. It's totally fine. It's totally fine. But you are exactly right. They made several design choices that make these short gameplay loops really. They made design choices that were additive to the gameplay loops,
Yes.
and we'll talk about them as we go through like the mechanics and such. But before we get there, I would.
Sorry, this just got me thinking. So the way the gameplay, you said the gameplay loops and mechanics, like you can replay levels as much as you want. The game actually also encourages you to go back to older levels as you get new abilities through the gameplay. And I know it's not technically this, but I always find it an amusing. It's not even close to not technical. It's not this, but I always find it amusing when people try to make any game possible and try to make an argument that it's a Metroidvania. This is not exploratory, so it completely negates it, but just the idea of like you have to go back to earlier levels after you get new power-ups is a very Metroidvania idea, where you get new power-ups and then you go back to the areas you were before and you can now find new hidden areas or this and that, or new hidden secrets or new hidden power-ups or stuff like that. This is probably going to make, just even bringing this up as a joke is probably going to make people mad, because everyone gets mad when you try to make anything a Metroidvania that's clearly not a Metroidvania. But it just started making me chuckle just thinking about, what if Pokemon Snap was a Metroidvania?
I mean, genre labels, they exist for a very niche purpose. I don't care about them. I'm perfectly fine to say that this has Metroidvania DNA, and if people get mad about that, well,
I mean, it's not a Metroidvania because it's not exploratory, but it's not open world, I guess. But what I loved about but to actually bring it back to a more serious note, what I loved about the level design was that, like you said, since it is short, when they do add more mechanics to your plate or new abilities, it doesn't feel like a chore to go back to those early levels and see what you can do with them. And I really enjoy that. I really enjoy that the levels don't really overstay their welcome.
Right, exactly so. And we'll talk more about the re-exploring aspect here in a minute. But for right now, this is where I was going before. I want to talk about the visuals with you. Because I'm revisiting this game in 2023. Hadn't played it since probably 2000, maybe 2001. And I gotta say, for an N64 game, I think this looks really, really good. I really don't have much more to say about it than that. Like, it looks good. It looks like a good N64 game. But I wanted to also talk about this notion of the living environment, the living universe of Pokemon. I alluded to this before, but the closest we had to a living universe of Pokemon prior to this was Pokemon Stadium. Maybe that was contemporary to this, I don't know. But Pokemon Stadium essentially was just the Game Boy battle system with 3D models. I mean, pretty much what contemporary Pokemon games are today. And when the Pokemon wasn't doing a move, it just kind of stood there. Pokemon Snap, however, I mean, the Pokemon are moving, they're interacting with each other, they're existing, and you really get the sense, and this is something that I say all the time on the show, what makes a good world, you get the sense that this world exists with or without you. You don't need to be there for this world to exist.
It feels persistent.
It does feel persistent, exactly so. What do you think? Like I guess you agree with me on that last part, but what did you think of the visuals? What did you think of the immersion aspect of this game?
Real quick, Pokemon Stadium it's weird. It was contemporary with the Japanese release of Pokemon Snap. Pokemon Snap came out on March 21st, 99, and Pokemon Stadium in Japan came out on April 30th. But the North American release, it's sort of contemporary. North American for Pokemon Snap, July 26, 99. North American for Pokemon Stadium, February 29th, 2000. So there was like a 7 or 8 month gap in between there. So it's like contemporary-ish. But in regards to the visuals, so what we're talking about right here, I'm with you. I really do enjoy them. And what I like about them is that all of the areas feel very distinct. And it doesn't, how can I put this? In almost every video game, you have your water level, you have your, you have a desert level, you might have like a plains or like a grass field level. But in Pokemon Snap, you don't really have that. Like, you have a beach level, which feels like a beach. It's not just sand and water. Like, there is sand and water, but there's tall grass and reeds that there's Pokemon hiding in. There are these tall rocks like the edge of a cliff, which I think is really cool. Like, it feels a lot more realistic in a sense than what you would see in other games. And I know, and even though it's a Pokemon game and obviously it's fictional, but like in almost any other other game, it would be like if you're in the desert level, everything's a desert. There's no variety to it. It's just desert. And I'm not necessarily criticizing that. I understand that works better for 2D game design, but in this, it just the as we said before, the persistent nature of the worlds, it feels that way. They're not persistent. If you go through the level, the same thing happens every time over and over again. But even with that said, the first time you play through it, it feels like there's just stuff happening all around you. And the visuals, they do a lot of cool things with visual tricks later on to unlock the secret level at the end, which I'm sure we're going to get into a little bit more detail later on. There are hidden Pokemon in the levels, which are basically you just have to take a picture at a specific angle, and the visuals really lend itself to be able to create all these creative things that you wouldn't see otherwise, or that you hadn't really, it's not that you hadn't seen in other games before, but just in this one at least, it just looks visually appealing, and all the Pokemon look like beautifully well rendered. They look like what they're supposed to look like. They look like something straight out of the anime. And like I said, just the variety of the visuals is perfect. I love the jungle level for that reason. It's very atmospheric. I love the second level, the cave, because there's just so many different there's like this weird electric factory vibe to it, but combined with all the stone walls and everything, it looks really good. I like it a lot.
Speaking of the Pokemon, in this game, you'll find 63 of the original 151 Pokemon. And you might be saying, why couldn't they add one more to make it 64? And I agree with you. I don't know why. They should have, though.
It's a crime. That's why. They should all be tried.
It was right there. But you also might be wondering, like, oh, that's kind of a low number. But I think it was a boon to the overall project because, like you were talking about, Josh, the Pokemon are all rendered really, really well. They're interactive with the environment, with each other, and adding too many would probably have, well, knowing the time, it would have added to crunch, which that sucks. But it would have also potentially made the overall visuals or performance suffer. This game actually performs quite well. It doesn't really stutter. There's not a lot of downtime. The load times are, fine. And I feel like if they would have added more, like up to 100, something was going to suffer. So I think it's good that they didn't, truthfully.
I also think even if you take out any technical issues with having more than 63 Pokemon, still should have been 64, but even if you take out any technical issues, I feel like limiting yourself to those 63, it allowed them to create a lot more interesting scenarios with these Pokemon. Like if you have all 151, I feel like you would have needed more levels to kind of really explore all 151 of them. But the 63, what's interesting about this game is that there's only 7 total levels, six main ones and a bonus 7th one. And throughout those 6 levels, at least I'm pretty sure I'm correct with that. Throughout those 6 levels and 7 levels, well, I'm not going to count the 7 because there's only one Pokemon in the 7th level. Out of the 6 levels, they have the other 62. And what's interesting about it is that there's so many different ways that you can get some of those. Like those Pokemon aren't always there. So here's just as a quick example. I'm not explaining my point well. In the volcano level, there is a Charmeleon that runs around this lava pit. Or if you can take a picture of him, you get a Charmeleon. However, if you use one of the little bonuses, whether it's the apple, which is a lure, or the pester ball, you can knock the Charmeleon into the lava and out pops a Charizard. And it's stuff like that. Now that's an easy one to find. But there's tons of others where you can discover new Pokemon by playing levels in different ways or looking in different spots. You can also discover new poses with the Pokemon, and visually that's just really cool. Like in the first level, you can see Pikachu on a surfboard. It's fucking adorable, and they did so many cool things where if they would have fit more than the 63 that they did, I feel like that level of creativity would have been hard to hit, because they would have had to find some way to balance the entire roster of 151. And I can only imagine how hard it is in the new Pokemon Snap when you have, I mean, at the time that wasn't 1,000, but you were basically at 1,000 Pokemon. It's like, it's I don't know if it's not really a running joke on the podcast, but it's a running joke in my own head for myself. I don't know anything past the 151 and maybe like the 3 starters from Gold and Silver. Like I don't even understand how they can do it in newer games, because there's just so much to balance. So I can't imagine it balancing more than the 60 some odd they put in here.
It's not so much of a running joke as it is something that I laugh to myself every now and then.
It's my own inside joke that only me gets.
Just real quick, the levels, you're going to have beach, tunnel, volcano, river, cave, valley, and the hidden level is rainbow cloud. And I believe those are in the right order. Do you have a favorite of these?
Yeah, I would actually say either volcano, or I want to say it's the last. What's that last level again?
That's not Rainbow Cloud. Valley.
Yeah. Valley?
Yeah.
Okay. Valley and Volcano, I think, are my 2 favorite.
Volcano's classic. I really like Cave. I liked the electricity element. Mm-hmm. You get to see all the Magnemites, and the mucks are in there, Electabuzz. Of course, I have all...
Electabuzz has the best sound effect of all time, of all Pokemon.
He's an aggressive one.
Pikachu, use your quick attack!
Electabuzz, quick attack back!
I've got to say, of course, Rainbow Cloud. Yeah, I loved that level as a kid. I love it now. Mew has been my favorite Pokemon since it was announced. Mm-hmm. Hasn't changed since. So that's pretty cool. Back to what you were talking about with the Pokemon kind of doing special things. One of the aspects of this game is replaying the previous courses. You're going to have to do that to progress. And the game does a really good job of not giving you all of the tools up front. We'll talk about those more once we get into the mechanics, but they kind of feed them to you one by one, so you're not feeling overwhelmed, and there's a really natural progression. So some folks, when they hear like you have to revisit levels, like in a Metroidvania, they might get a little overwhelmed. And this game is for children, so I mean, they did a great job of balancing that. But as you're going through these levels for the second time, you might, let's say you go back and now you have the pester ball, and now you can pelt, I don't even know, a Grimer with a pester ball enough that it evolves into a muck or something like that. You can do all these things, lure Pokemon over here, play the Poke-Flute for them, and they're going to all react in unique ways, which in and of itself is really cool. But that's also how you kind of earn your way forward into the new levels. You'd mentioned pushing the Charmeleon into the volcano to make it evolve into a Charizard. That is classic. That's what I think of when I think of Pokemon Snap. And it's cool because back then, this was, I'm about to go Abe Simpson for a minute. Back then, we didn't have the internet. So if you didn't have a magazine that detailed all this, you had to just figure it out yourself or talk about it on the playground. And it's just, we'll never be in that moment again, right? Because we have the internet, and for better or for worse, it's here forever. Well, knock on wood, I suppose. But it was just, I have so many fond memories of just talking with people like, oh, how did you do this? Like, oh my God, like Pikachu can surf? Or, oh my God, where's that Kingler rock? Or, what have you. And that's really cool. So the replayability of this, especially for children, but I think in general, it's safe to say it's above average. I might dare say high.
Yeah, I would say so. And what I think is really interesting about the design of it too, like with all these secrets, secrets is maybe too strong of a term for it, but like all the different unique, secrets, it's a secret. Like being able to get Pikachu on a surfboard isn't broadcasted. You have to figure that out. And you're like, oh, I can do that. That's built into the normal progression. Now, they do give you hints about it. But so in the second level, in the tunnel, that's when you first get access to the lures, which are just apples that you can throw. And you'll notice if you they even say try throwing a lure at an electrode. And electrodes are, for the most part in that level, are stationary except for the very beginning where one's rolling away from you. But if you hit one that is stationary with your lure, it starts like it'll blow up. It starts like basically flashing really bright white, and then it'll just explode. Well, at the end of the level, you'll notice an electrode chilling off to the right, just kind of chilling off to like there's its own path. So you're like, oh, well, I blew up the others. Let me blow up this one. And you blow up that one, and it like knocks off a bunch of the rocks, and now all of a sudden you have access to the volcano. You have a new area
Yep.
you can go to. And that took me forever as a kid to figure out, and I shouldn't have, because Professor Oak literally tells you try throwing it at an electrode. Like he tells you flat out. But I think that's really important because he doesn't tell you where the electrode is. He doesn't say at the end of the level or anything like that. He just tells you to do it. And I think by doing that, it encourages the player to realize, oh, I can do more with these than just lure Pokemon away. I can do more with these and just try to get them into a specific situation. And as you get more of these power-ups, like we said, you have the lure, you have the Pester Ball, then you have the Pokeflute. In order to get like Zapdos in the tunnel level, you have to lure Pikachu over to this giant egg in the one cavern in the tunnel, and then you play the Pokeflute. So you throw the lure to get Pikachu next to it, then you play the Pokeflute. Pikachu starts sparking because that's how Pikachu reacts to the Pokeflute, and then Zapdos will burst out of the egg, and you get a new Pokemon to take a picture of. It's really cool. And it's the same thing even with for example, like the Magnemites at the end of that level. If you throw lures, and the 3 Magnemites will come together and turn into a Magneton. So you can, and you need the lure in the first place to take pictures of a Magnemite, because if you try to take a picture of a Magnemite prior to that, it uses its electricity to interfere with your camera, which I think is kind of a cool, a little bit logical. Whether that's actually real, like actually accurate to what would happen with a camera and some type of electromagnetic like activity, I don't know. But at least in the game world, it has some logical sense behind it, which I think is really cool. One of the reasons I ended up loving this game so much as a kid was because there was always something more that you could discover, and I always thought that was really cool.
Oh yeah, 100%. And in the era of, a kid might get one game every couple months, having that level of replayability and discoverability was, it was tantamount. And we haven't explicitly mentioned this, but this game takes place on rails. You're on a track. So having these different creative ways to explore, quote unquote, is super important. And you're exactly right. As they give you new materials like the electrode, it's good teaching, right? They give you a new concept, i.e. hit the electrode and it'll blow up. And then they reinforce it with relevant examples, i.e. there's an electrode just off to the right at the very end. Do you remember what you did earlier in the level? Sure you do. Give it a try here. Boom. You figured out something new. It's really good. It's I didn't expect to have so many positive things to say about this game, but honestly, like it does so much so well. One thing that I feel a bit mixed about, which I'd like to touch on super quick before we get to the controls, is the sound and music. I'm going to ask you first, actually. What's your feeling on the music in this game?
I love it, actually. I love the menu music.
Really?
Yeah, maybe it's nostalgia. I'm not saying it's well composed. You're the musician out of the two of us, so I would trust your ear more than mine. But like, I really did enjoy the music of this. All the different, I don't know, probably a lot of it's nostalgia, like, but the menu music, that like it has a really cool, like, I don't know if syncopated is the right term, but it's got, I really like that that little rhythm that they play, and then they kind of accent it with that da-da, which I really enjoy. I don't actually like the sound effects all that much. I think the Pokemon sound effects themselves are excellent. I cannot stand Professor Oak at all in this game. He annoys the fucking shit out of me, because his grading logic, which we'll get into it later. I don't want to get too far off track because we're talking about music, right? Music and sound. But his grading logic is fucking bullshit. And every time I have to hear him go, oh, and like all his stupid reaction sounds,
Wow,
just makes me so mad.
you were close.
And he sounds so weird in this game, too.
Yes.
Like, kind of nasally.
It could have just been because the N64 really wasn't meant to have, like it. The N64, one of the reasons it didn't do as well in this console generation is because the PlayStation 1 literally could do streaming audio. You could get CD quality, Red Book quality audio, though it would take up a lot of space, but you could get Red Book quality audio out of the PlayStation 1. The N64, it was compressed to hell and back. Doesn't mean that you couldn't get good music out of it, but it took a lot more effort. It took a lot more intentional design, intentional composition. That's the word I'm looking for, in order to get good music out of it. Kind of, I know some people criticize the Genesis for that as well. I love the sound of the Genesis, but it like, because there's some amazing music written for it, but it is very easy to fuck up Genesis music, and I feel like the N64 is similar to that. And so there's a lot of compression on all the audio sound bits. Now, real quick before I throw it back to you, the audio effects, like the sound bits for all the sound effects for all the Pokemon, their little voice samples, those were done by the original actors for all the Pokemon from the anime, which I think is kind of cool that they brought them into this game. Like, it's one of the first examples of using the voice actors from the anime, the American voice actors at least. I don't actually know if it was American or Japanese, but it's one of the first examples of using the actual voice actors from the anime in the game.
It is really cool, and they do sound great for that. Yeah, I always think about the PS1 versus N64 sound in terms of like Metal Gear Solid, and just thinking about like, oh, what if that was on N64?
It wouldn't
I don't
sound
think
as
I'd
good.
like that.
Wouldn't sound
I don't
as
think
good.
it could exist on N64, to be honest.
You want to see the biggest example? Tony Hawk's Pro Skater.
Oh yes, you're right. Yeah, they had
they
the
cut
the
out
loops
the music
on the N64.
The loops are shorter on the N64 version.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. We just, oh man, shout out to the Retro Hangover review crew. I never want to touch Tony Hawk again after fighting for my life in that monthly challenge.
Oh, I love Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, but sorry, go on.
No, you're fine. I'm a bit flipped as to you on the sound and music.
Okay.
I don't think the music is composed poorly. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just it's so forgettable. I could not hum it to you if you paid me. I truly couldn't. That being said, with the exception of Professor Oak, I actually do like all of the sound bites. I think they all sound really nice. But more importantly, I think one thing about the sound design that I'm a little thankful for is when we think about this loop, right? You're gonna do levels like 5 times minimum, right? And though the loops are short, if every Pokemon was talking more and there was just more sound, oh my god, that would get so grating so quick.
It's not too much. I kind of take back my point a little bit. I only hate Professor Oak's sound effect.
Wait.
I like all the Pokemon sound effects. And then also to kind of clarify a little bit more on the music, I like the menu music. The level music isn't that memorable. I think but I think that's a good thing because I feel like it builds the atmosphere of the level versus actually taking. I think it would take away if it was too strong, because I feel like you're trying to be like this nature photographer, right? And what's out of nature? Nothing but sound. Like there's no music generally out there. So I think it kind of fits the theme. But with that said, I can kind of see your point where like especially with the individual level music, it's forgettable. I love the menu music, like the everything in between, the interstitial stuff, but the regular levels definitely are much more forgettable.
And by the way, you were correct. That is syncopation, where you're accenting the quote unquote offbeats. Like do 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 da da do. Oh, that was actually the Rite of Spring. now I'm thinking about the Rite of Spring with like Pikachus all around. There's like 3 people listening that thought that was really funny. But I think if the music were quote unquote better and more involved, it would. It would be better music, but it would detract from the experience. So is it forgettable to me? Yeah, but also I don't know that I would like it if it weren't,
I gotta know, just in general, like, because we both kind of hinted at that before, and if this is like too much close to like a final topic for the episode, not that I'm trying to end it out early, but like, did you enjoy your playthrough of this game? Would you say, like, without going into the more details of it, like we'll save like our overall thoughts obviously at the end, but like just a kind of a blanket statement. Did you enjoy it, or were you in the middle, or did you not enjoy it?
I think somewhere in the middle. I would have enjoyed it much more had I played it on original hardware. I played this on my Steam Deck. I emulated it there, and I had some emulation issues that I had to kind of troubleshoot to fix, which was really annoying. I had one where I just couldn't progress past the first level because it wouldn't let me show Professor Oak any of my pictures. So there was just nothing I could, like that option was just not available. So I think had I owned an N64 and played it there, I would have liked it a lot more, but it wasn't unenjoyable to play. It's just, it was a nice breath of fresh air as I'm playing other things like Final Fantasy VI and Hades and Death's Door, right? It's just an easy breezy little turn the brain
like an
off.
Hour and a half.
Yeah, exactly. So no, I didn't dislike it,
Okay.
What about you?
Oh, I'll say overall I'm kind of in the middle, but on leaning more towards the side of enjoying it, and I'll save more of my reasons as to specifics on that till we get to the end of the episode. But I was thinking about it because we both kind of led the episode off with saying how like, well, it's really nostalgic, but it kind of is underwhelming in performance. But then we have been rattling off for the last like 40-50 minutes or so just all these compliments about the game, and I think for me a specific, not that I think we have to necessarily constantly balance it out. Here's all our praises, here's all our criticisms, but like for me the criticism of the game is actually I don't think you could design it a better way, but I think the pace of it is just very slow, and because it's slow, it can be easy to become disinterested. I also think it's harder to replay it once you've beaten it, especially without the nostalgia factor, because I think part of the enjoyment I had of this game as a kid was finding all of the secrets. For example, like you play through the first level, the beach, right? And the game starts off, it does a really good, it's a very simple tutorial. The game starts off, when you get to the first Pokemon, a Pidgey flies across your screen. The game will completely pause. It'll say, hit the Z button. It hits the Z button, and then you zoom in. And then it's like, all right, now hit the A to take the picture. It's like, okay. And it'll do that for the first 3. And that's the entire game. You hold Z to like aim the camera, to like zoom in with the camera. Then you hit A to take the picture. And after that, it just kind of sets you off. So the first time you play through it, you're just kind of trying to see everything. But when you get the different power-ups, like when you get the lure, that's when all of a sudden the Pikachu you see at the beginning of the beach, you can lure it over to the surfboard. You can actually also use the lure, like there's a section later on the beach where an Eevee is chasing around this pink ball. When you throw it at the lure of the pink ball, a Chansey like unfolds. It's like it stops the Chansey, and now all of a sudden the Chansey is that you get a new Pokemon to play with. You can throw the ball into the ocean, and Magikarp will fly out of the ocean, the lure out of the ocean. Oh my god! You can throw the lure into the ocean, and a Magikarp will pop out of the ocean. And there's stuff like that where there's also a moment at the end, like there's a Meowth chasing a bunch of Pidgeys, and if you let the Meowth go, you get a pretty cool shot of the Meowth like getting whirlwinded and passing out. But if you keep hitting the Meowth enough so it gets away from the Pidgeys, if I remember correctly, then you stop that from happening. And that's just with like one power-up. If you get the Pester Ball a little bit later, you notice there's a bunch of tall grass, and you see all these random, like you hear this rustling in the grass, and you see like bunch of like pieces of it flying up into the air. And if you throw it in there, all of a sudden a Scyther comes out, and you see a bunch of cool shit like that. Like, and that's just in the first level. Like, there's so many different things you can do in the first level alone. It really is impressive. And I think actually I saw either on a video or maybe it was a screenshot. I guess there's a Doduo that runs across the screen early on in that beach level as well. I'm assuming when you get the Pokeflute, you can use the Pikachu to shock it and knock it out. And then, because I saw a still of Pikachu on the beach with a Doduo just passed out next to it in the sand. So all of that's just on the first level, and it just gets more and more in depth. In the second level, if you throw the lures at the Electabuzzes at the middle cavern, they will run over to the generators and start powering them up, and you can see like these projectors shining stuff on the walls, and it gives you hints as to get more secrets within that same level. It's just secrets upon secrets upon secrets, and it adds such a cool sense of discovery that there's so many different reasons for you to go back to replay it, especially when you get the new abilities, and they give you so many unique ideas that you can do with. I love, as a kid, that's what hooked me. It was that discoverability where like you'd play through a level and all of a sudden you'd be like, holy shit, there's a Scyther in here. I remember it blew my goddamn mind when you could like figure out a way to get in the valley level. If you can lure a Magikarp down the creek, down the river, and throw it into a waterfall, a Gyarados will pop out. It's shit like that is just so cool to me.
Especially as kids too, because kids, even after they discover all of the secrets, they're just happy to exist in that world.
Yeah.
Right. Especially since it's something like this and not the original Pokemon Red, Blue, Green on Game Boy, or even Pokemon Stadium. Whereas adults, we've got the big brain, so we figure everything out a little quicker, and maybe it doesn't have as much staying power for us. But I think, especially for that age demo, man, they crushed it. They really knocked it out of the park. That those Electabuzz at the generator, I think that's one of the secret landmarks that you have to take a picture of.
Yes, because once you get both of them, then there's two projectors that show up, and then there's like a third at the very end, right towards the end of the level. And if you turn around, then in the shadows, there's a bunch of random shit just jutting out of the ground, and there's a light on the one side of it. So when the light projects onto those, the shadows they cast up upon the wall turn into some type of Pokemon. I forget exactly what it is. It's a Pinsir. Sorry, it's a Pinsir. That's what it is. And it's just really cool. There's tons of cool stuff like that in each of the levels, which I think is really fun.
So we're going to move on to controls and mechanics here. This episode especially, we maybe should have started with that because we've kind of been talking about it the whole time. So if you're listening and you were going to give us a bad review, you can't now. I already criticized myself, so you can't criticize me. That's how that works, right?
That is my go-to defense mechanism. Criticize yourself before someone else can and take all the power away from them.
Yes, sir. So we've already mentioned that you are Todd Snap. It's still funny, but you are in this cart, right? It's called the 01, and it's the same cart that Todd used in the show, if memory serves. You are on a track. It's just like a rail shooter, but instead of guns, you're shooting pictures. Again, I think it's a super cool concept because I couldn't tell you another game that is photography based like this, at least not, at that time. But that's pretty much all you need to worry about is pointing your camera and shooting. You're going to use the stick for that, obviously. You can zoom in, snap a picture. You've got 3 items that you get throughout the game as you move on. Like we already talked about, they give you these one by one to kind of help that discovery. I believe this is in order. You get first the Poke food, like little apple-shaped Pokemon food. You can lure a Pokemon with that. You can hit him in the head with that if you want to agitate him a little bit. You get Pester Balls, which are these, they kind of look like Pokeballs with like
green and blue or green and red or something like that.
Yeah. And the purpose of these, if you hit a Pokemon with them, it's going to like knock them out. Like they'll fall over and it'll generally annoy them. The Poke Flute is kind of cool because it'll play it can play 3 different little tunes. And every Pokemon, for the most part, is going to react differently to this. Some of them, it's required for you to like Snorlax, if the classic example. If you play the Poke Flute for him, that's how he gets up and kind of moves around a little bit. Otherwise, you don't get a good picture of him. But sometimes you play them and the Pokemon will just dance or interact with each other a little bit, and that'll get you more points in Professor Oak's rating system, which I suppose is what we should talk about now.
Well, real quick, before we get into that, one final thing on the controls. You can, in the N64 version, I don't know what it was like on the Steam Deck, you could use the C buttons to do quick turns. So instead of having to painstakingly slowly move your cursor or like move your camera left or right, because the way you would do it, since it's a photography game, it's not like it's a first person shooter where the center, like your aiming reticule is always at the center of the screen no matter what. You would, if you move your aiming reticule or whatever you want to call it, your reticule to the left or right of the screen, it will move left or right, but the screen itself won't move with you. So and the reason for that is so that way you can get pictures of Pokemon that aren't like, you can, it actually kind of works with this. Normally I hate that type of thing. It's very like kind of an old school first person shooter style of control, but it kind of works with this. But in the N64, you could actually use the C buttons to do quick jumps, go left and right. Actually, am I misremembering? Did I describe the controls incorrectly for aiming the actual reticule?
Not incorrectly, just mildly unclear. So you are right. Like the reticule, if you move it just a little bit, it's not going to move the whole field of view.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
It's whenever, like, you can go from facing forward to a 90-degree turn right just using the stick, but your reticule has got to hit the side, and then the whole field of view is going to move.
And it's a pain in the butt.
Yes, and it's slow. So those C buttons are kind of a boon in that way because it can give you like really snappy 90-degree turns. Really, really good, really helpful.
Yeah. That was the last thing I wanted to say about the controls. Those C buttons specifically really saves a lot of time, because I think there's also one like if you turn all the way around, I think you can hit like C up and it'll just completely about face you to front and center. So that's really handy when you're trying to like turn around real quickly and you're trying to like look at stuff fast and you're worried you're going to miss something. But other than that, I didn't have anything else to add to the controls.
Yeah, they're pretty simple. They're fine. They're unintrusive, which is good. They I think this game, whether it's was advertised this way or not, this game is all about immersion. And if the controls were any more complicated, it would have taken away from that. And 10-year-olds with pea brains, they couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle it back then. So good that it didn't. I wish the camera moved a little faster. It's pretty slow, but that's really the only critique I have. So you can use these 3 devices, the food, the pester balls, and the Poke Flute, to get better pictures, different pictures, more diverse pictures, and that's good because Professor Oak is a heck of a critic.
You were close.
For years, the phrase, "it's right in the middle of the frame," has been burned into my memory. So you almost spoke passionately about this earlier, about how much you did not like this. So what are your qualms with Professor Oak as your judge, as your critic?
There is the most bizarre combination of consistency and no consistency. There are certain criteria where it's like, okay, it's in the center of the frame. He usually doubles the score for that, or he gives you a certain amount. The size of the Pokemon, like within the picture, matters. Like, so essentially how close you were to it or how big it is in your picture. And I understand the logic of, there being, like giving you a higher score for a Pokemon that's larger within the frame, because that means you're closer. It's harder to get those photos. What my issues is that if it's not dead center, if it's slightly off center, even if the picture itself looks better, and listen, I understand you're trying to program a game in like using binary judging skills for a medium that's inherently not binary. Like artistic expression is nothing but gray area. So when you're looking at a picture, you could take this beautiful picture of a Pokemon, but if it's not center framed, even if it's just a half inch, like a pixel off, he's like, oh, this isn't in the center. I'm like, the fuck are you talking about? It's literally the center. But because the game doesn't register it as perfect center, it's like doesn't count. There's also moments where it's like even you have it centered, you have it at a good size, but the pose is kind of off. And they're like, so for example, if you have too many Pokemon in the picture at once, the way he grades the photos is that, so say, we'll take the example of the Meowth and the Pidgeys on the beach that I mentioned before, how the Pidgeys will do their gust and knock Meowth out. If you try to take a picture of that, if you're trying to get the Meowth specifically, the pose, he might like the pose because of like him getting whirlwinded, but because you can barely see him, he doesn't count it. Like I actually did that photo one time, this really cool photo of Meowth getting knocked out by a gust, and he wouldn't even count it because you could barely see Meowth in the picture, which I can understand, but like you could get these cool photos, but he was counting it as a Meowth instead of the 3 Pidgeys in there that were giving Meowth a gust, if that makes sense. So like when he's grading the photos, he only grades it on a per Pokemon basis. So if there's multiple Pokemon in a picture, he will only like whichever one is more prominent is the one he grades it off of, or whichever one is in the reticule that you take a picture of. That's the one he focuses on, and he'll give you bonus points for extra Pokemon in the picture. But if it's too like obfuscated, I guess it fucks it up somehow. I'm sorry if I'm not explaining this well at all, but it always would infuriate me where if it was either slightly off center, it didn't work, or he gave you a lower score, or if you had too much happening in a picture at once, the game essentially didn't know what to focus on, so it'd say, picture shit, you get 0 points, and that just irked me.
Yeah, and that level of artistic choice is beyond the scope of not just the game, but
the
probably
N64.
Of most children. Well,
Yeah.
Yes, that too. Like I don't think that I don't think any kid was thinking of that. Although, I mean, that Meowth getting knocked out by the gust does look pretty cool, and it is a little frustrating when you get a cool shot like that, and because, like you said, it's obfuscated, the Pokemon is obfuscated, Oak is like, not good.
Even though I have a crystal clear shot of 3 Pidgeys, he thinks it's the Meowth, and that's why it didn't do well. The Meowth's obfuscated, but I was taking a picture of the Pidgeys, but that didn't matter. He was focused on the Meowth. I'm like, this piece of shit, it's 3 Pidgeys doing a cool move, and you're focused on like Meowth's whisker that you can't see.
There's got to be some kid that had that realization whenever they played it way back when, and just got so pissed that they grew up to become a photographer. Like, take that, Professor Oak. My name is Todd Snap.
I didn't grow up to be a photographer, but I did recognize that issue as a kid where I would get a picture. There was a couple where like the Pokemon would be larger in frame and it would be doing a cool pose, but because it wasn't centered, Oak's like, doesn't count. I'm like, you piece of shit. This is a better photo. Everything else, like I can even as a kid, I was like, all right, if you don't want to give me the 1,000 points or the ×2 multiplier, whatever the point thing that he gave you, the point per thing that he gave you for it being centered, if you don't want to give me that, that's okay. but you're completely ignoring the fact that this Pokemon is larger in the frame and it's doing a cool move. But because it's not center, you're just throwing it out. Get out of here. Just pissed me off.
Yeah, I didn't play enough of the new one to see if that was any better, but yeah, I mean, it's always tough, right? I mean, this was an issue that, well, issue in quotes. This was something that I noted when I played Rock Band and Guitar Hero when they were contemporary, right? It's difficult to kind of bring something of that level of artistic expression and solidify it into a game of, did you do this or did you do that? Or did you do this or did you not do that? You know, so there are challenges. And not to go on a tangent, but you know what game I think handles that kind of well is Trombone Champ.
Really?
Yeah, dude, because like Guitar Hero, think about it. Guitar Hero, if you miss the button inputs, all that happens is like the strings make like a plucking like muted sound. Like
I know exactly what you're talking about.
But Trombone Champ, like you've got the full gamut of the trombone. You don't even need the notes. Like you could just improvise. I think that's pretty cool. That's completely different topic.
I need to play Trombone Champ, dude. I actually played trombone in like junior high through high school. And so I need to get in on that boner champ.
It's a genuinely good game.
That's
like
what
it's not hearing. It's not popular anymore very much, but it's honestly very good. I think I played it for like 10 hours, and I'm probably not going to pick it up again, but it was a fun 10 hours. You know?
I need to play it. My wife actually also played the trombone in high school as well, so like her and I need to play this game. I think maybe I should live stream it. That'd be really funny.
Oh yeah. It's a great streaming game. I touched on I mentioned the new Pokemon Snap, so I just wanted to talk about that really briefly. There was a new, which is what it's called, new Pokemon Snap. Mm-hmm. It is a sequel to Pokemon Snap N64, and it came out. Well, it was announced in June of 2020, which was like primo time for this to be announced. Considering the God, what was happening?
It came out in 2020. Like, it was announced in 2020.
Yeah, what was happening back then?
Oh,
a pandemic.
Whatever that thing was called, a pandemonia.
It was released. It was released a year later, the very end of April 2021. This time developed by Bandai Namco, but again published by Nintendo. It is. I didn't play too much. I know you didn't play this, so we're not going to camp on this too long. I played like the first couple of levels. It is, I mean, it looks, how do I describe this? It has that extremely sharp, contrasty, and vibrant look that a lot of Nintendo games have today. So it's going to look good 12 years from now. But looking at it, it's a lot. It's almost overwhelming at times, but it is very cool to see like all of the Pokemon. I don't know more than half of their names. I do not know anything past Gen 2 or Gen 3 really.
I'm with you. Like I said before, basically past Gen 1, I know nothing.
Yeah. But it is really cool to see that. We talked like really briefly about this before off mic, but they overcomplicated it a bit. There's an actual plot. You're getting backstory when you're introduced to these first two characters. I mean, immediately they're like, oh yeah, this is my research assistant. She's here because I knew her parents, so I gave her this job. And it's like, well, yeah, that's actually true to life. So yeah, that sucks. But like it's a little too much. And they've added some new mechanics, like a research level that it's a little too much for what I'm wanting. Otherwise, though, like playing the game, it plays almost the same, just more polished. No complaints there. I think most folks that play it got generally good reviews. Again, I mean, your 7 out of 10s, your 8 out of 10s, that kind of deal. A lot of folks echoed those thoughts that, it was a little too, not complicated, but they tried to do too much, things like that. And then, tying it back to what we talked about towards the beginning of the episode, this kind of game is tougher to sell now on an emotional level to kids because, like you said, we've got Pokemon Go. We could take screenshots on our phones that are available to us 24/7. It's just the landscape has changed. how do you make this game viable to children in 2021? Did they succeed? I'm not so sure, but it's not bad. I guess that's a roundabout way of saying that this game is fine. It's not bad, but it didn't do anything spectacularly well.
I'm very curious to give it a try at some point. Like I wonder if there's as many secrets in the new one as there was in the first one, because like I said beforehand, secrets is what made that first game so much fun. And you also mentioned like it's a lot harder to do that type of thing it's a lot harder to do that type of thing now because of the internet. It's hard to keep secrets secret when you have the internet. And I think the last time I actually experienced a game that kept that level of secrecy well enough for a good while, it's now been dispelled now, but it was Pokemon Go, because when that game came out, everyone was like, oh wait, like, you were trying to find Pokemon in real life, but you never knew where anyone would spawn. I remember being at work and like people would be saying like, oh, there's a Bulbasaur nest at the park across the street. Oh, there's you were told where Squirtle nests were, like where specific nests of different breeds of Pokemon were, because no one knew where anything was. My boss made her own map of, like, she took Google Maps, she printed, like she got it into like Microsoft Paint, and then put like the individual, like marked off different locations as to, like, this is a Squirtle nest. There's this type of Pokemon was spotted here. This type of Pokemon was spotted there. And my boss did that. And it was just like, you don't know where to find that shit anymore, because since the game was all mobile, like no one knew just at the moment how it all worked behind the scenes, and it made it so much more interesting. I'm not going to go. I could go on to so many stories about Pokemon Go when it first came out, and the last time I experienced something like that was Pokemon Go, because it was just impossible at the time to have all those secrets spoiled for you due to the nature of the game itself. And so I wonder if the new Pokemon Snap, A, has secrets, and B, even if it did, would it still be as enjoyable when you can just look up all the secrets in the game?
Well, and I did just that just now. So there are secrets and Easter eggs, yes. But as you said, it's a Google search away. So we're never going to go back to that time. Like I mentioned before, we're never going to go back to that pre-internet age where truly finding these secrets is not an event, but it is an expedition in and of itself.
Is almost part of the game experience, like that. That type of thing was part of the game experience, and you'll just never get that back.
Right, exactly. So, and even if you just swear like, oh, I'm not going to Google it, it's the fact that it's there changes the dynamic. So it's, I mean, Pokemon Snap, man, Snap, Pokemon Go, that is really something. I never got too into that. I think I tried it for a day, but that would be an interesting thing to look into and maybe do an episode on sometime down the road.
I've been wanting to do an episode for my own show. Maybe actually I should have done it back in 2021, because that would have been the 5th year anniversary of it. But maybe I'll wait another 3 years and do an episode on Pokemon Go, because that summer, I joke about it, that was the closest we've ever got into world peace. Everyone was out there playing Pokemon Go together. Just, everyone was out walking, and it was like there were so many people outside exploring their local neighborhoods that they never did before. But that's not part of this episode. I want to do a whole episode on that, on Pokemon Go, though, because the game has changed a lot since its launch in 2016, and there's just so many cool things about it that I really want to explore in an episode. But we're here talking about Pokemon Snap. But yeah, the last time I experienced what Pokemon Snap gave me, I'm sure there's others I can't think of any others since Pokemon Go. Maybe there's others, but like one of the reasons I fell in love with Pokemon Snap was because of those secrets, and it's kind of a bummer that part won't quite be the same in the new one. Yeah, it is what it is. I mean, we can't change it. But yeah, if you end up... oh my God, I can't believe Pokemon Snap. I forgot it was that old. Time goes by so fast.
So that's about it. We're rounding out the discussion on, the 11th best-selling game for the N64, just in case anybody was curious. Top 11, that is including 4 that were bundled with the system. And if you like these kinds of statistics, 3,630,000 is roughly how many copies of this were sold. That's pretty cool. You mentioned secrets. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about with Pokemon Snap, just because, of course, it involves Mew, is that last secret level,
Yes.
the Rainbow Cloud. So I didn't do it on this playthrough. I frankly didn't want to. But if I'm remembering correctly, the way to unlock Rainbow Cloud is to take a picture of, I think there's 6 total, but you have to take a picture of all of these special landscapes. The first one that you're going to find is a rock formation that distinctly looks like Kingler.
Yep.
That's one of the easier ones because it's sitting right there, and you just take a picture of it. Some of them, like you mentioned earlier with the silhouette of Pinsir, will require some strategy, quote unquote, using your items. But if you take all of these, you'll unlock the Rainbow Cloud, and there is only one Pokemon on this level, and it is Mew. Which is super exciting to me. Mew is at first obscured in this gas ball. You've got to, from what I understand, there's a couple of ways to do it, but I've heard just pelting it with pester balls, or maybe it's Poke Food, will eventually get it to drop its shield, and then you can take pictures of it, and you get a shitload of points because it's Mew. And man, that's just so cool. I still sometimes will think about just how collectively hyped everyone was when it was like, oh my God, Mew is going to be in the games and in the movies. And it was just such a cool time.
That last level, I think it's actually kind of a bit of a letdown because there's so much build up to it. You have to take those 6 hidden photographs, which you have to figure out some of those in and of themselves are puzzles. So you have this really secret element. You hear whispers about it. You have to find the hidden Pokemon in the game. And so you're looking all through it and you're trying to find it. And then you finally do and you get to it. And all it is, you can throw either a Pester Ball or the lure. The Mew will come charging, not at you per se, but it'll be in your direction above you, and then you just throw the lure at it, and it hits the shield, and you'll see there's cracks in Mew's shield as it goes along. Once you hit it enough times, then Mew loses its shield, and then it has to slowly chase after it. You'll see it off in the distance. Excuse me, and Mew has to chase after it. But the way it works is that since you're going on a track, right? It's an on-rails photography shooter game. So its shield bubble, Mew's shield bubble, will launch out basically coming from behind you, going straight out forward, and then you will steadily see Mew slowly going along chasing after it, and that's your chance to get pictures of it if you can get it in time. And that's fine. It's easy to get. But I think what's underwhelming about it is that you do all this work for a level that has no turns, no interesting visuals other than you're just kind of in space. So after you kind of get past that initial oh, this is a new place, there's nothing else visually interesting to look at. It's just nothingness for a good solid couple minutes. And then once you get your pictures of Mew, and the way Professor Oak grades is that when you submit a picture for him to grade, whichever Pokemon is in it, you can't submit another one of that same Pokemon that in that same round. So if you can take 30 pictures of Mew, you can only still submit 1 to Oak. And so, you're going to take a lot of pictures and you're going to try to get it. But generally, after maybe the first, maybe second time of breaking Mew's shield, you're going to get all the shots you can possibly get of Mew. And then you're just waiting for the level to end so you can go to Professor Oak and he can yell at you over some arbitrary grading system you don't understand. It just really, I love that the final thing is Mew. I love the build up to Mew. But the level itself is super underwhelming. I wish they would have had something a little bit more than just Mew in there. The Mew needed to be there, but maybe just a little something else.
Sure, as opposed to just relying on the novelty of Mew.
Yeah.
Which, to be fair, at the time was very novel because Mew was a big deal when it was, when we found out that you could legitimately see it. But yeah, the level is a bit straightforward. Well, completely straightforward, really. And
Just a lie.
yeah. If somebody called it boring, I'm not going to argue because it kind of is.
It's kind of a bummer because it is boring, but it's fun that you get to finally see Mew, and then when you see Mew, you get pictures of Mew, and then you still have 2 minutes to kill on a straight line with nothing else to view. So that's kind of why I just am a little disappointed with that final hidden level.
If folks want to play this game today, there are really there are 3 ways to do it. Original hardware, which is always what I'm going to recommend if that's feasible to you. You can also play it on the new Nintendo Online with the expansion pack, which frankly I don't recommend because that's a lot of money to me, in my opinion.
It would be more. It's cheaper than buying original hardware. And if you want to buy a pre-owned N64, you're still looking at like $80 to $100 now for an N64 alone, versus like you can pay like what 25 or 30, maybe even 50 for a full year of NSO.
Okay, but remembering what happened with the Virtual Console on the Wii U and now the 3DS, I just don't trust it.
That's fair.
And plus, I mean, if they made it available for purchase, that's one thing. But I don't know. As I get older with things that are not strictly on PC, I'm moving more and more into like you got to own it. That can't,
I'm with you on that. I think the difference in this, in my opinion, one actually, you can get on a family plan. I do this with a bunch of friends. I pay $8 for the entire year for NSO plus the expansion pack because we're with like 6 or 7 other people and we all chip in and we only pay like $8 total, and it's wonderful. It's a really good deal. Now, with that said, the reason, take out the price. Say it's doesn't matter. Say it's $50 per person or $60 for a full year, whatever it is. Take out the family deal part of it. The only reason I would say it's worth it for this game is, I guess I would say it depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking to get into collecting, hell yeah, get the console. Like I have an N64. I have 40 some odd games for it. I have a whole bunch of games in my collection, but that's a big investment to make into something that you might not even care too much about. If you have a passing interest in it, NSO is honestly the way to go, just because there's a lot of different games that you can try out between NES and Super Nintendo and Genesis and N64 and now Game Boy and GBA and all these other things. So you get a lot more variety in terms of trying out different things, and you can try out this game. If you happen to like it, then maybe invest into if this is something that really interests you and you don't want to lose it when NSO eventually does go offline or you stop paying for the annual fee or monthly fee or whatever it is, then yeah, look into it. But otherwise, you'd be dropping alone for Pokemon Snap. If you don't have an N64, you're looking at dropping probably in between for N64 and Pokemon Snap, probably $110 to $150 for that, just on a whim to see if you like the game.
There is a third way.
Oh, yes, sorry. The better way. This would be the best way. You're right.
Yeah, I would frankly suggest this above the other two. Emulation. I mean, you can do it. Now, if you are into the handheld emulators like Anbernic, the Mius, and etc., you're going to have to check because not everything can emulate N64.
That's the issue with I would say, sorry to cut you off. My only argument against emulation, it's not because of emulation itself, it's because of the N64. N64 emulation is spotty, and on top of that, the controller is one of the best things not the best, so it's kind of what makes the game a little bit. But I think, can you buy USB N64 controllers?
I believe you can, yeah.
Yeah, you might as well go with emulation. That'd be a lot cheaper.
Yeah, the controller is the big reason why I think I would have preferred to play this with a real controller, an N64 controller, that is. N64 emulation, if your machine can handle it, is mostly fine at this point. I mean, it depends largely on the title. If you've got any sort of gaming PC, you're probably going to be fine.
Yeah.
I think some places might even have like an in-browser version of it. I don't really know. But it is something, if you are planning to do the emulation route, it is something to keep in mind. And N64 emulation is not as straightforward as, say, Genesis or PlayStation 1, for example. So there you go. I mean, those are 3 ways to play this game. It was available on the Virtual Console on the Wii U, I think. I'm pretty sure.
I'm pretty sure you're right, yeah.
But those contemporarily in 2023, at the time that we're recording this, those are the 3 easiest ways to do it. Just depends on what you like to do. And speaking of that, would you recommend folks to play this for the first time in 2023?
I'm torn because I think this game is good. I think it's fun, but I genuinely don't think this is something people would enjoy if they didn't grow up with it. And I don't know why. Not saying there's not going to be people who enjoy it, but like in general, I don't think this is a game that people would enjoy if they don't have that nostalgia for it. And it's weird to say that because I do think it's a really well-designed game. I think there's a lot of good things in this game, but I think the core gameplay mechanic of the slowly going through levels, taking photos, is not going to appeal to someone now as it would have in 1999 when it first came out. I just don't think it's going to have the same level of, not appreciation, but the same level of enjoyment that you would have back then. So I actually don't recommend it, but it's like a light don't recommend, because I do think there's elements here that are really good and really fun, but I do think this is a game that's stuck in that's trapped in 1999, and it's going to be very hard to be able to break it out of that decade and of that year.
Yeah, I feel about the same way. If you're a newcomer to Pokemon, like if you just jumped on with Sword and Shield, Scarlet Violet, like the newer generations, give it a go. I mean, the worst that can happen is it's not for you. But if you're a Pokemon fan, then yes. If you're not particularly attached to the Pokemon franchise, I'm with you. I don't. There's not that much here that'll keep your attention, probably. But Pokemon fans, this is something for you. Don't know why I'm talking like IGN, but there it is. Yeah. And if you like the new Pokemon Snap, obviously you probably are already aware of this. So there's that.
I think to kind of wrap up my own thoughts with it, I just to kind of clarify what I said at the very beginning, just to kind of bring it back to that, where I said it's nostalgia in theory, but underwhelming in execution. It just kind of that's what I said before. That's what I meant by it. Where if you grew up with it, it's wonderful. It's one of those things where, like, you know how some people will play like GoldenEye for the N64 and they'll go back to it and like, oh, this isn't as good as I remember it being. I don't think this is quite as jarring as that, but it's got a similar vibe where it's like you have all these fond memories of it, and then you go back to it and you're like, this isn't quite as exciting as I thought it was going to be. And I feel like this game, like, that's where it is. It's like it's better in your memories, but a little underwhelming in the actual execution.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. So now that we're sort of wrapping up, I don't really have much more to say about it. I think we articulated everything that we needed to. Pokemon Snap N64 1999 edition. Play it or don't. You're not going. Truthfully, you're not going to be missing out on a ton.
What a lukewarm reaction! We end this episode. We're like, well, it's a little good, but play it if you want to.
Look, man, 2023. You should try it, but if it doesn't hook you within that first 5 minutes,
it's not gonna hook you in the rest.
So now that we've arrived at the end, I'm going to plug the socials, the Discord, and the Patreon. Very important there in just a moment. However, first, it's always the guest's turn. So Josh, you are the host of the Still Loading podcast, and I wanted to give you a second to tell our listeners about that, what it is that you do, and where to find you on the internet.
Yeah, so the Still Loading podcast I kind of describe as a gaming grab bag podcast because I do focus a lot on retro, but I do retrospectives on individual games. I interview people in the industry. I do episodes focused sometimes on music where I've only actually done it once, but I got a music artist on and we kind of played their entire album and dissected each one of their songs, and I talked to them about what I liked and what I didn't, or I didn't really go into what I didn't like. That'd be rude right in front of them, but but I didn't really have much.
You were a little out of tune in this measure. Did you hear that?
Right. Yeah, so I kind of do a whole bunch of stuff. Some of the goofier ideas though that I always like to shout out just to have other listeners of other shows get an idea of like some of the other bizarre ideas I come up with. A couple years ago I did an episode called Still Loading Storytime where I had a bunch of friends do dramatic readings of video game manuals for an episode, so like old NES game manuals, and had like my one friend did an episode, read a manual in the voice of Alex Jones, which is pretty hysterical to listen to. That was fun. I've also done episodes like the Final Fantasy Draft, where it's what happens when you take Final Fantasy and fantasy sports and mash them together. That was a lot of fun. It's hard. It would be way too much to explain in depth as to what I mean by a fantasy draft version of Final Fantasy. Listen to the episode. If you like Final Fantasy, you're going to like the episode, I promise you. But yeah, that's the Still Loading podcast, found where all good podcasts are given away for free. And you can follow me at Still Loading Pod on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And I can edit this out if not, but your Discord, is it public?
It is public. I'm just very lazy. There's not a lot going on in that place, so no one can. I do have a Discord. If you are curious about it and you want to try to liven it up for me, feel free to message me over on because I don't know what the link is off the top of my head, but feel free to message me over on any of those socials, Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, and I can send you an invite link.
And I'll make sure to put those links in the description as well as the @ for you to search for the Still Loading podcast, which I recommend that you do. I recommend that you check it out, and I recommend that you give them a follow. It's follow on both Instagram and Twitter. Give them a follow and give them a listen. In the show notes, you're also going to find links to the Pixel Project Radio socials. Longtime listeners probably already know this, but if you're new, we are always glad to have you. You can find us at Twitter and at Instagram. Just search Pixel Project Radio. You'll see us. In the show notes and in the socials, we're also going to have a link to the Discord. It's Discord. I love when folks come and are active in the Discord. I really do. Really do. I wish it were bigger. I wish it were more active. Could be you. Are you the one? Find out.
Will you be his one?
Will you be my superstar? Will you be my superstar girl, boy, person? Doesn't matter. We've also got a Patreon. This was the newest of the bunch launched. Well, it's not really new, but you can find that at patreon.com/pixelprojectradio. We have a lot of great folks, really kind folks that are choosing to support us. I'm very passionate about supporting local and small artists, of which podcasting falls into that category. And if you like what we hear, you could go check out our tiers. Everything from $2 and up. I try to make the $2 tier the most bang for your buck. That's where you're going to get the bonus episodes, schedule in advance, and voting privileges. And there's some goodies for the higher tiers too. So once again, that's patreon.com/pixelprojectradio. Check it out if you'd like. Check us out on Instagram, on Discord, on Twitter. Check out Still Loading on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and the Discord, and wherever you get your podcasts. So with that, I'm all snapped out. I'm all snapped out for today. Josh, thank you for joining me. This was not a long time in the making, but it was in the making for a while, and I'm glad that we finally got to make it happen.
Thank you for having me on. I had a lot of fun. I was honestly worried going into it because I was like, man, will I have enough to say about Pokemon Snap? Apparently I do. I cut you off a few more times than I would have liked to, so I apologize in advance for that. Well, I guess it's not in advance, in the aftermath of that. But yeah, I had a lot of fun. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, pleasure was all mine. So thank you, Josh. Thank you, listeners. For now, I am still, haven't changed yet. My underwear says, check here, Rick Firestone. Thank you for tuning in. I'm signing off for now. We'll catch you next time.